Full spoilers. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth delivers on Remake's deadly promise. Just like its predecessor, not only through a multiverse of second chances does it take major liberties with the theme of life and death from the 1997 classic it claims to be remaking,
this is so messed up,
but it also rips the tension, pathos and depth out of that game's most famous and emotional moments. I approached Rebirth fully armed to experience its multiversal mayhem, ready to live a whisper-infused plot coupled with an insane finale, because after playing Remake, I didn't wish to see the beats of the original game anymore. Why bother following the beats when you've set up a path to create your own story now? And why bother following the beats when you're simply going to trample all over them? And while the sheer notion of a multiverse in Final Fantasy VII is a never-ending kick in the nuts, I'm approaching this critique just as I approached actually playing Rebirth, through the lens of having accepted that Rebirth is the continuation of a story that set up a multiverse of possibilities. Knowing this was just another wild sequel to the 1997 classic made the experience far more palatable, and there is a lot to enjoy in this game. Nonetheless, Rebirth is a dizzying cocktail made from your childhood memories. Just one sip and you'll spin down the rabbit hole, transported in a catatonic state, perhaps even submissive to the greatest lie, because as you play, sometimes you'll forget what they did to your favourite game 4 years ago. You'll confront your memories, maybe you'll even believe you're following a faithful remake. The lie may only last minutes, or even seconds, until you're roused back to reality. As you play on, you'll willfully expose yourself to that whiplash again and again, as if searching for something you know is not there and can never be there, as if to repeat to yourself over and over, it could have been good, if only, if only. And I guess that's a testament to how Rebirth often captures the spirit of the original game before letting it slip through its fingers. Rebirth is packed with so much charm, mini-games, exploration and side quests. Maybe Final Fantasy hasn't been this fun in a long time. Many of the journalist reviews seem to reflect this, as if to acknowledge Square Enix's jaded years of stilted world design and exploration. I have to give them credit. The combat is as exciting as ever, the music as beautiful as ever. Square Enix have poured so much love and effort into this game. They have tried so hard. Now there are a million things to do, but the things that matter to me don't seem to be there anymore. I can't help reminding myself that Rebirth has the luxury of inheriting the strongest cast of characters in all of Final Fantasy and somehow pays them a disservice. I can't help reminding myself that Rebirth studiously follows the spine of Final Fantasy VII's fabled post-Midgar Disc 1, perhaps that game's strongest section, yet consistently fails to capitalise on its most striking moments. As soon as the end credits rolled on Remake, a legion of fans would have had you believe they never wanted a faithful remake to begin with, not even a nearly faithful remake. Yet of course, as these same fans looked to the future, they wanted the calm flashback, the Barret and Dyne confrontation, Nanaki's return to Cosmo Canyon, the Temple of the Ancients, and Aerith in the Forgotten Capital, awaiting some kind of fate. They praised the potential for the new, but over the next 4 years were permanently obsessed with seeing those old, standout, original game moments reborn in the latest graphics. As if to say, Square Enix were free to reinvent Final Fantasy VII, but there were limits to how far they were willing to see them go. So I guess they wanted old moments, but new moments. They wanted an experience where the same things happened, but also didn't happen. I often wondered, would they care if Dyne blew Barrett's head off, if Seto's tears turned Nanaki to stone, if Aerith caught the Masamune with her bare hands? Is that where they draw their line? Those of us who drew our line at bringing dead characters back to life, we were seen as purists, and our preferences were not to be respected. That was a fun 4 years. Zack's definitely not coming back. The game will be 100% identical to the original game going forward. The whispers are gone, we swear. What a mess Remake left its own fandom in. And Rebirth opens by affirming everything we knew to be true, if you were paying attention at all. Zack is alive. Both he and an alternate reality Cloud reach Midgar. The door to infinite worlds and infinite lives is ajar. Rebirth has a lot of Remake's baggage to deal with, namely the multiverse and the handling of Sephiroth. But irrespective of those elements handed down by Remake, there's so much that Rebirth gets wrong about Final Fantasy VII. In the original game, world and story were the things that mattered most to me. It's those things I'd like to explore. For many people, one of the main selling points for this game was the world outside Midgar. How would Square Enix do justice to that epic sense of wonder we held in the original game? There's something timeless about that journey from Calm to Junon, and then heading out over the sea. I turned on the game and dressed myself in black robes, a willing participant on the grand pilgrimage. Come hell or high water, I was making that trip, and what a trip to see this cinematic rendering of a world I held so dear. But while the abstract world map of the original game told me so much, Rebirth paints every blade of grass from shoreline to shoreline, and its world suddenly seems all the smaller for it. No estimations and guesstimations of distance and space in between. The world is now everything you see on screen, and nothing in between. An open world, a closed imagination. Yet, still, I can appreciate the love and detail across its varied locations. Sometimes I'll stop in my tracks, completely spellbound by the view of Junon and the Sister Ray cannon. Yeah, this world would have been enough for me. If everything else had worked with this project, I would have taken this. But even though the world is an improvement on the likes of Final Fantasy XVI, for me, magic and wonder exists in a place beyond communication towers and map icons. Perhaps just an open road to my next story objective would have been enough, and everything left unmarked until I discover it. Any deviation from that main road would be for me to make, whether that's finding an NPC in a cave who gives me an ancient weapon, or a new community or situation I stumble upon, without the game itself steering me towards anything else other than my prime objective. That way, if I did deviate from my goal, then it's just me indulging in exploration, and I've maintained the illusion that the story is still the main purpose. Because even though the content that fills this world is largely optional, it becomes clear that there are two games playing out at the same time. The game of chasing Sephiroth, and then the game of exploring the sandbox. Each zone inviting you to complete a set of similar tasks to the last zone. And across all this, who even decided I needed a helper, guide and voice in my ear? In the original game, I was the master of my own destiny. While once upon a time I could drive past content without even realising it, now the reminders and prompts from Chadley and the incessant phone calls that ring out whenever I make the mistake of interacting with something in the world seem purely a conduit for Square Enix to say, please come explore all this side content we've set up for you. Don't worry about Sephiroth. There's a huge amount of time to play sandbox, sucking the jeopardy out of the story. I know that sounds a little harsh. Rebirth is not the first game to juggle an open world with a dramatic cinematic story. Maybe it simply matters so much because Rebirth's based on a game that had a greater sense of urgency and a greater sense of mystery across its world. It's Sephiroth's trail that opens up the world, but our heroes don't often seem that keen on following it. For example, the story forces you into a prolonged side quest filled vacation at Costa del Sol, when really you probably should have better things to do. Tasks which should have been relegated to purely side content status suddenly become mandatory requirements. If things are purely optional, there is a distinct difference in that if you indulge in them, then you are the one breaking the flow of the story. You're the one hitting pause to do some non-canonical activities. But when a story about hunting a villain forces you down tributaries, I feel it's only inevitable that there's a certain measure of urgency lost in the process. And I say this fully aware that the original game plants you into a gold saucer date, all while the threat of Sephiroth is looming over the plot. But it works because the party are there to acquire the key to the Temple of the Ancients, and the date is a spontaneous event, arriving from the fact that the ropeway back to Corel is closed for maintenance. Whereas in Rebirth's Costa del Sol, completing tasks so the heroes can get onto the beach and follow the robed men feels like obvious filler. There's no depth here, other than extending the clock and giving you more things to do as a player. Maybe if Aerith had fallen into a depressed state and needed some carnival games to lift her spirits, I'd feel less inclined to question why the characters are wasting so much time here. But enough about the world at large. How do Rebirth's towns and iconic locations shape up? My feet touch ground in Calm, which trades its peaceful, homely feel for a noisy, festival-like atmosphere. With its crowded, always-on attitude, it feels more like a shopping centre people go for a day trip from Midgar.
I better stock up on a quick one while it's still
This place has great customer service. It's my go-to. Calm's finest.
Not even hearing the famous Calm music can return me home. I can't help thinking it would have been more impactful to hear, in this early part of the game, both the world map theme and the Calm music for the first time, but both tracks have already been used liberally in Remake. Unlike the original game, there are no actual homes to enter, only shops, cafes and hotels, which doesn't help dispel the feeling that this isn't a place people actually live in. That becomes a common sight throughout the game. Costa del Sol is booming with activity, but every building is a business of some kind. Where do all these NPCs actually live? Even in places like Underjunen, there's no more walking into someone's house and stealing their potions. Only in Gongaga and Nibelheim are there actual homes to enter. Towns in general are now noisy affairs, NPC chatter floods the UI, 100 conversations are happening at once, the kind of nod towards realism I could do without. Outside Calm, I walk back towards Midgar. The music transitions to Hollow, a clever touch, as if I'm wandering back into the remnants of Remake. I like that I can walk the road I thought would only be reserved for an FMV. Later, I look on Midgar from afar. There's no smog, just a clear blue sky. The water surrounding the great city is crystal clear. No sewage, no pollution. This world's doing okay. Maybe it doesn't need me after all. I start to realise this isn't the world I knew. There's no endless night in Junin, no pensioners wandering aimlessly in darkness at 2 in the afternoon. Now it's a sun-kissed fishing community, filled with the trendy, ambitious, latte-sipping NPCs that populate every town across this world. As a consequence, Midgar feels even less compelling and unique, if that was even possible, because it's the same cheery bullshit transfused from one town to the next. There's no great disparity between outside and inside Midgar, other than one location has a roof over it. Even Cosmo Canyon has fallen to the tourism industry, overpopulated, overdesigned. It used to be a place you'd go to contemplate your place in the universe. Now there's something deeply insincere about Bugenhagen's operation, a telescope sitting on top of a tourist trap. And I don't care if it's more realistic that it's now swarmed with visitors. I'm not chasing realism here, I'm chasing a vibe, a mood. Cosmo Canyon was somewhere you could escape from the world, a remote source of knowledge and inspiration, hidden among the steep valleys and crevices of that region. Now it has its own airport. Even the desolate atmosphere of Corel Prison has evaporated into the desert from whence it came, replaced by a forgettable dust bowl, no longer built upon the ruins of Barret and Dyne's hometown, no longer a festering pit of hate and despair, no chocobo carriages roaming the endless arid landscape, no sense of hopelessness. Just a band performing, people travelling in from outside, and a host of NPCs looking for fun and games. High above, helicopters arrive at the Gold Saucer. It's the prize at the end of the rainbow, the one we've all been waiting for. But inside the Gilded Park, I'm saddened to see Wonder Square missing its basketball game. The roller coaster now replaced by a generic space fighting simulator. The halls are gigantic, but it all feels so empty. And how about Chocobo Racing? In the original game, I rode through an LSD dream, where my senses surrendered to 100 signals. Not totally sure if I was riding in some cordoned off indoor studio or through the entire theme park itself. Sometimes the races seem to cut across the night sky. Now that wild charm and personality has been plucked like feathers, but the racing itself is more fun to play. While I can see its value, somehow I never return for a second race. Maybe because the park itself is a chore to navigate, perhaps that's a feature not a bug, a ploy to trap visitors. Because over 20 years ago, I practically lived in the Gold Saucer, but now I can't imagine returning here. Perhaps Gold Saucer loses its place when most of the minigames can now be found outside the theme park. The minigames exist in this weird realm, a place people can venture to and say, look how loaded with content the game is. Gold Saucer is no longer there. Gold Saucer is everywhere. Over the mountains, the Shinra Mansion staircase has fallen victim to some erroneous rubble, blocking our path. You would think it'll be even harder to find all the clues to the mansion's safe now, until you find them lazily plastered across a wall. I guess Square Enix think their modern fans don't have the patience for puzzles.
For God's sake, just give me the damn number!
There's nothing cryptic about this game, other than why it makes the decisions it does. As I arrive in the Temple of the Ancients, my mind pulls back nearly 25 years. With its boss fights and challenging layout, I remember how much I struggled here. Now, I suffer for all the wrong reasons. My momentum halted by pushing crates, reconnecting the livestream, and a whole lot of praying. This is not something I can do faster next time. This is not a world I'm excited to return to on a second playthrough. Speaking of second playthroughs, 4 years ago, despite Remake's storytelling shortcomings, I did jump straight back in for another go. And while Rebirth again has an excellent combat system boosted by exciting synergy abilities, a strong soundtrack and a decent open world, a second run is not at the top of my list. And if I could point to one reason, it's simply the story. Leaving aside its wild finale, Remake's plot seems well structured in comparison, from having piggybacked off the strong opening Midgar beats of the original game. Now freed from Midgar, if Rebirth is about one thing, it's chasing Sephiroth. And as that chase progresses, the game is in the difficult position of juggling not just multiple character stories, but even multiple realities. Because Rebirth must carry the baggage left over from Remake, and it must make use of it somehow. As the game's opening scene unfolds, I can only wonder, am I supposed to care while watching an alternate reality gang of heroes meet their fate? Am I supposed to care that there is an alternate reality Aerith that needs saving? Because if there are 2 timelines, then there can be 3. And if there can be 3, well, you know where this is going. Multiple timelines, multiple versions of your favourite characters, endless opportunities to save them. In such a realm, does death mean anything when you know there's a long line of replacement alternate reality characters queuing up to get into the story? Unless handled by expert hands, a multiverse means an impossible battle to inject meaningful stakes in your story. Maybe I can see something like this working if Aerith B was a completely different person to Aerith A, easily identifiable with her own distinct traits, and if perhaps you were attached to both of them to the point where you'd mourn their absence. In Spider-Man No Way Home, you have 3 actors who fans have grown hugely attached to over the last 20 years of Spider-Man's cinematic journey. No one wants to lose Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, no one wants to lose Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, because they are identifiably different Peter Parkers in our eyes. Now that's a product of having 3 different actors and being in a unique position to create some sort of payoff to their respective universes. Make that movie with 3 Tom Hollands that are the exact same character, and you've got a different movie. If Aerith dies, you know there's a long line of her exact doubles waiting in the wings. As soon as you get even a hint of that, there is a seismic disconnect, even subconsciously. That's a major problem to have in your story. For a game whose advertised climax is the iconic Forgotten Capital Aerith scene, it is mind-blowing that in the very first scene, you were taught that death has no real bearing on the story. Sure, you might lose the Aerith you spent 40 hours leveling up, but the next Aerith will soon make you get over the first. I'm someone who feels that once you open the door to alternate timelines, there is no closing it, even if the heroes find a way to pull the plug on the multiverse. If it existed once, it can exist again. After all, it didn't fucking exist from 1997 to 2020, and here it suddenly was. In this new age Final Fantasy VII, anything can be concocted at any moment. Later in the game, we see just how far Square Enix are riding with this thing. New timelines are opening before our very eyes. It seems every decision births a new reality. It's like Gwyneth Paltrow's sliding doors, except somehow less interesting.
How much would your life change if you were 10 minutes early?
Hello?
Instead of 10 minutes late?
Helen?
If I had just caught that train, I'd have been home ages ago.
You don't want to go wondering about things like that.
Now, Helen's life is about to go down 2 different tracks. Gwyneth Paltrow, and Gwyneth Paltrow in the story of a woman about to choose.
And the kicker to all this, of course, is they added this to Final Fantasy VII, a game whose theme was life, a game who hammered at home with an iconic death scene, and then the gaping void left in that character's wake. Anyway, I picked up Rebirth knowing it was taking this direction. I was kind of curious how it would handle the decisions Remake made. I didn't wish to beat Part 2 over the head for choices Part 1 made, but rather to appraise how Part 2 would carry that torch forward. So I'm not really in the, whoa, where did this come from phase. I'm in the phase of, yep, it happened, I'm giving it a chance, and it's still a terrible idea. But for a story with such a wild concept, it's funny how Rebirth ends up clinging so tightly to the beats of the original game. Throughout the main of the story, we'll periodically switch to Zack's alternate Midgar drama, a taste of the other worlds that are out there. Even if you were a fan of Remake reviving Zack and Biggs, maybe you will even feel a little shortchanged here. Like there's a game trying to break out of its cage, content practically begging for DLC status. But I guess that's part of the baggage Rebirth must shoulder. And after the events of Remake, there's another whopper this game has to contend with too, Sephiroth. We roll into the base timeline and we shoot back 5 years. The rain falls as we enter Nibelheim. In the original game, this flashback comes right after we've been introduced to Sephiroth as the dark figure who's just permanently ended our biggest headache in the universe, President Shinra. We don't know much else about Sephiroth until he's revealed, riding in the back of a truck alongside Cloud. In Remake, we already used Sephiroth as a black and white piñata. The aura was shattered, the mystique destroyed. Now I watch Sephiroth burn Nibelheim and I'm thinking, yeah, you might be a badass to these villagers, but I can take you. I already have, you just don't know it yet. In the original game, the flashback introduced me to an evil I'd need to find and somehow grow strong enough to face. In Rebirth, basically, I'm watching a documentary about a guy already fucked up. Add to this the fact that Rebirth makes every effort in this opening section to have Sephiroth appear as the consummate gentleman. Almost as if Square Enix accepted everything we knew to be true over these past 4 years. That there was no way to make Sephiroth scary again after dragging his head up and down the Midgar Expressway. So instead, they used the opportunity to inject more humanity into his characterization. Even the mechanics seem to undermine Sephiroth's threat. Remember in the original game, you just stand by as Sephiroth lays waste to a dragon, Cloud completely eclipsed through stats alone. In Rebirth, you can fully control Sephiroth. You, a mere mortal, can take control of the legendary soldier, but the exponential power difference to Cloud isn't nearly as obvious in a fast-moving battle system with so many elements on screen. I could barely tell how much extra damage Sephiroth was doing in comparison, and more crucially, as Sephiroth, I can take damage, and I can face the brink of death. I can see his HP hit the red zone, and I can see him fall. It may not be canon, but it sure feels like it in that moment. But Rebirth will beg and plead with you to respect Sephiroth's threat. Watch him save Cloud over and over again. Look at the disparity between them. It's funny how the original game told us everything we needed to know through a battle system. Maybe there's nothing inherently wrong with hammering home the difference in skill level between Cloud and Sephiroth in a different way. It's just the calls of, this is better than the original because the power gulf is so much clearer, or you can really feel the difference now because you can control Sephiroth, that I find to be totally untrue, evident by the fact that we've all, collectively as a community, for over 25 years, gushed at how flashback Sephiroth is presented in the original game, without ever voicing a way of improving it. But these are the types of changes I would have expected and could have almost tolerated from a remake under Square Enix. After all, it would be near irresistible for their developers to not stretch out or dare try amplify the things fans responded so positively towards. But, unfortunately, the amplification of landmark moments becomes a common theme throughout Rebirth, turning the volume up so high that the message is often lost in the fray. Back in the present day, predictably, the Midgar Zolom is now a mandatory boss fight, and after seeing Cloud and gang obliterate Destiny only hours before, a giant snake suddenly doesn't seem the most intimidating force in the marshes. When I booted up the game, I half expected to see the Midgar Zolom hiring a chocobo to escape us instead. After easily dispatching the beast, the game lets it win via a cutscene, dragging Cloud underwater, just so the story can show Sephiroth striking the final blow, just so it's absolutely clear who's still in charge here. You know, in case you keep forgetting, you should be scared of Sephiroth. The characters will remind you of that all along the way. Apparently Sephiroth's doing so much more behind the scenes. A battle for the fate of the universe is playing out away from our sight. They say Sephiroth's got a master plan and that he's very dangerous, but to me, at all times, he's giving off that Team Rocket energy, an antagonist we'll easily dispatch again by the end of the game, to return next episode for another thrashing. At the end of the original Star Wars, if Luke Skywalker defeated Darth Vader in a lightsaber duel, does Empire Strikes Back fill you with the same level of apprehension? If Luke cut off Vader's hand at the end of Empire Strikes Back, Does Vader still seem like a threatening force in Return of the Jedi? It's almost as if taking a short-term win in making Sephiroth the final boss in Remake and letting you knock him for sixes proves to be a long-term fail. This gets worse if you imagine the Remake project as one entire story. If that story was condensed into a 2-hour movie, the heroes are facing and defeating the chief antagonist every 40 minutes. And Rebirth is now picking up the pieces of that decision. So even if Sephiroth was at his most wicked in the Nibelheim flashback, can you really claw back any of that sense of suspense and fear? But Rebirth is really more of the same from Remake. Sephiroth appearing to say random things, just to remind Cloud that he should be following him. As the story progresses, Glenn Lodbrok appears, another spectral being speaking in riddles, this time to Rufus at least. Another antagonist who makes you feel that Sephiroth now has even more competition in this story, helping to further diminish his stature. By the end of the game, we'll learn that it was Sephiroth all along, sowing the seeds of war between Shinra and Wutai. This is all part of the bigger, dangerous, horrible things Sephiroth is planning, a reunion of worlds. If you're not scared, you should be. But maybe not for the reasons Square Enix intended. I'm scared because it's hard to believe that chasing Sephiroth is my goal. There's so much noise and stalling in each location I visit. The characters don't sound like they're chasing a murderer for the fight of their lives. Instead, it's almost meta again in that the developers are saying, okay, here's the Costa del Sol bit, here's the Corel bit, visit all these locations and we'll meet you at the Forgotten Capital for the finale. Later in the game, there's a scene where the gang put on VR headsets to experience a Gold Saucer play. But that's how I feel the characters are often behaving in the main story, like they're living a VR experience without meaningful stakes, like they know the outcome of this adventure is a done deal. Take as much time as you need, enjoy the beach, enjoy the Gold Saucer. We know you've been looking forward to them. Sephiroth will literally wait for you while you have your fun. But to be fair, why would the heroes be overly concerned with Sephiroth? They barely mentioned the Whispers after this life-altering battle they had at the end of Remake. It's yesterday's news. No contemplating what it meant to change destiny or what this means for reality in general. We're back to focusing on micro problems like,
Can we rent some birds?
Can we?
That's not to say the characters should be wandering around totally shell-shocked from Remake, but I expect an appropriate amount of acknowledgement, confusion or doubt expressed by the characters in the early portion of this game. Maybe even some infighting among the team as to whether or not they made the right decision. After the Zolom, we power through the Mithril Mine. Some may call this story padding, but in my eyes, it's an organic place to put a dungeon. It's purely getting from point A to B, unlike Remake, where villains sidelined you by dropping you into dungeons, and those areas acted as barriers between you and the main path. The Mithril Mine is a geographic feature we've elected to overcome, something we need to pass as part of this world's terrain. On the other side of the mountains, Fort Condor is a distant animation rather than a distant JPEG. Bonus points for Square Enix. In Underjunin, Yuffie washes ashore, taking the place of Priscilla from the original game. Not the kind of change I would have lost any sleep over. I actually think it's a neat way of bringing a now mandatory character into the game, while paying homage to an original game moment. Yuffie's darkest hour seems long behind her. She wants to get right in Shinra's face, and doesn't seem to have much fear of Scarlet or Rufus wheeling out Nero again. Maybe she did some serious leveling up between Midgar and Junin. Her personality's pretty full on in this game. I know she often gets a bad rap, but I at least can appreciate that she's an intentionally cringe character, rather than an accidentally cringe one. A bunch of anti-remake fans have gathered outside Junin's Shinra elevator. Just when I start to feel at home here, Roach skids onto the scene, spoiling for a fight. He says he's here to capture Aerith, but all he's waiting for is another showdown with Cloud. And he's kindly willing to wait until we can find his battleground. After taking his beating, he finally accepts he's not the main character. Later, twisted by Hojo's signs, Roach falls at our feet, and I finally feel something for the poor bastard. Instead of dragging out a one-note character across Rebirth and into Part 3, they actually added a little meat to his story. Not bad, Square Enix. In Upper Junin, it might not make a huge amount of sense hiring an unknown quantity, 16-year-old ninja with a big mouth to assassinate the president, but maybe Mayor Rhonda is a couple moves ahead of me. I'm thankful at least that it does give rise to a dramatic beat. Yuffie's shuriken spins through the Junin air. I watch its deadly edges catch the sunlight. I wonder if Square Enix are about to try something wild here. They don't. At least the parade was fun. I impressed the Shinra soldiers so much, they decided to indiscriminately kill their comrades alongside me. Remake and Rebirth love making characters do things. Worry about the why behind it later. Actually, they'd prefer if you don't worry about the why. As we depart Junon, I realise there's been a mass exodus from this continent. The NPCs of Midgar follow you out of the city like rats off a sinking ship. Like they know the spotlight has turned towards the new world, and they're desperate to share the screen with you. Now, it's no longer a novelty to see someone you know. It's to be expected. It's little things like that make the world seem smaller. The boat to Costa del Sol is captained by tonal whiplash personified. 1 minute, Captain Titov is full of fun and games, hosting a card tournament.
Get ready to shuffle!
Next, he's putting bullets in people. And then later, he's back on the Tannoy, telling you to have a peaceful trip.
On behalf of the entire Shinra 8 crew, we wish you a peaceful night's sleep.
At Costa del Sol, the story grinds to a halt. The characters just want to soak up some sun. If I was chasing a man who killed my mother, I probably wouldn't spend a day earning tokens for some beachwear. But that's just me. Maybe I'm the freak. No longer content with some simple R&R, now even Hojo's getting involved and wants me to stay in this little paradise forever. In hindsight, I should have appreciated the sun more, because once I arrive in the Gold Saucer, it's all downhill from here. Rebirth plays this game of trying to hit the memorable beats of the original story, but completely demolishes them in the process. Now I know what Cloud felt when he saw that famous photograph, because Square Enix have opened up a box of old snaps, and I'm stunned by what the camera shows. Remember the original game, from Cloud's point of view, finding the dead Shinra soldiers and Gold Saucer staff, sprawled out over the floor, slumped over desks, then learning that they'd been shot by a man with a gun on his arm. Our minds instantly turned to Barret. Had he snapped? Surely not, but what if? Did being forced to relive the trauma in North Corel push him over the edge? Maybe we didn't know him after all. Would we have to face him now? And would he force us to do the unthinkable? Only when we were flung into Corel prison did we learn the truth, that Barret's old friend Dyne had the same operation and the same outcome, a gun on his arm. It took falling into the depths to discover the truth, and it took all of Barret's resolve to find and face his old friend alone. In Rebirth, we get a total reimagining of this sequence. Before the shooting even takes place, now from Barret's point of view, we watch a man with a gun on his arm move through the Gold Saucer. The game instantly exonerating Barret before the crime has even taken place. Square Enix making sure we don't think the unthinkable for even a second. Now as Cloud arrives to find the bodies, we know who's to blame. It's not our man, it's the other man. The dramatic irony hangs over the scene for a moment, as only we, the viewer, know this absolute truth. Cloud and friends quickly catch up and decide it cannot be true. This isn't Barret's style. Now, instead of Dio instantly casting us into the eternal desert, he gives us 24 hours to find the real killer. Instead of chasing an ally who maybe we didn't really know at all, we're now fighting an uphill battle to clear his name. And if you're thinking, well, there's not much difference between the two, both sequences lead to a similar outcome, there is a stark difference, because the original placed you in a state of suspense. In Lord of the Rings, suspense is thinking the Nazgul are about to murder our heroes in their sleep. If instead we had watched a scene where Frodo and Sam fluff up some pillows and stick them under blankets, and then from afar we watched together as the Nazgul were fooled by this convincing setup, you've got a very different scene, very different mood, different kind of suspense, I would think. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, back in the original game, you never believed Barret was guilty anyway. Well, there were people who did. Just like there were people who considered, for the briefest of moments, that Frodo Baggins was about to get impaled in his sleep. And Rebirth could have easily recaptured that feeling, even if you think it's somehow elusive and that audiences would never have bought that this modern Barret could sink to such lows. A walk of shame through North Corel could have been enough to break a man. So doesn't the original Barret Dyne setup feel more powerful at least? Because we were the ones left in suspense. But now we're left with a 24-hour timer to vindicate Barret and restore his Gold Saucer membership pass. Do you remember in the original game, climbing to your feet in Corel prison, following Barret through the wasteland, through his ruined town, his ruined memories, facing Dyne at that cliff's edge, in the place where Dyne's world all fell apart, the place he buried his wife, the place he believes his daughter lies too. When Barret reveals Marlene's still alive, Dyne threatens to kill her. They fight, and, defeated, Dyne limps away, jumping from the cliff's edge. The only way out of here other than suicide is back up the elevator, so Cloud joins a chocobo race to try earn the team's freedom, which is something of a movie plot in itself, convict to champion jockey, the race to freedom. In Rebirth, we walk into Corel prison and are instantly set upon. The gang members knock us cold, only so the story has an excuse to transition to daylight. Cloud is suddenly at the mercy of a bunch of level 10 goons. A quick triple slash and we'd be done here, keys in hand, but Cloud seems keen to play along with this charade. The flamboyant gang leader will free our teammates and let us track Barret, only if we earn the gang some cash by winning the chocobo race. But to do that, we'll need to earn some greens to feed our chocobo, and to do that, we'll need to perform a series of side quests. This story doesn't believe in momentum, it's all about putting up walls and inflating the amount of time you can stay in any one area. Instead of using iconic locations to tell stories, they use iconic locations to act as hubs for content. Once Cloud wins the race, it's back down the elevator and finally we can chase Barret to a junkyard of no significance. So insignificant in fact that it's Cloud who suggests checking it in the first place. The apparent threat of a man with a gun on his arm has already been neutralised by that famous gang we talked about earlier. Dyne's just a sitting duck until Barret arrives to free him. Old friends fight, but this time, instead of man against man, Dyne reveals a startling mutation, exemplifying Square Enix's approach to even the most intimate of scenes. As I said earlier, amplification. Turn up the dial and blow out the speakers. If a scene was popular in the original game, add as much noise and distractions as possible. Subtlety is a banned word in Square Enix offices. There's no more threats against Marlene, there's no suicide, there's no more looking into Dyne's soul and seeing Barret's reflection, there's no two sides of a coin, there's no more feeling sorry for Dyne, there's just a shouting man and his gun, and a whole lot of rage. A swarm of Shinra troops invade this watered down scene, saving us from Dyne's psychosis, but stealing from Barret and from us in the process. Barely a moment to rest before the game serves up a random Palmer boss battle, simply because they couldn't think where else to position this fight. Maybe if Square Enix had given room for Dyne's scene to breathe, and then let Cloud go win our freedom, that Palmer boss battle may have made sense in the aftermath of the chocobo race. At least there would have been a 20-minute break or so between the showdown with Dyne. Even leaving aside the mishandling of the Barret and Dyne scene, structurally, which game's sequence of events is stronger? In Rebirth, you land in the prison, you leave the prison to win some cash in the chocobo race, you come back to the prison, you follow Barret, you face Dyne, you fight a wave of Shinra troops, you face Palmer, and you drive off into the desert. In the original game, you land in the prison, your head dizzy with suspense, you follow Barret, you learn the truth, you find Dyne, and having closed out that story, you then win your freedom. The chocobo race taking the spotlight as the only step and chance at escaping the desert. Your life is literally riding on this race. I ask myself, is the game being faithful because it goes to Gold Saucer, it goes to the prison, it goes to the chocobo race, it shows us Dyne? Or is it not being faithful because while it visits those areas and events, it handles them in inferior ways that undermine the tension and gravitas of the original version? It's not a case of being wedded to the original. If you can do something better, it will land. Square Enix don't know how to let an intimate moment just be, whether it's Dyne and Barret or Nanaki and Seto in Cosmo Canyon. Instead of, after completing Bugenhagen's trial, witnessing a poignant moment, which, if I'm being honest, often makes me more misty-eyed than Aerith's death scene, we have a scene that's hijacked by shifting focus to Bugenhagen's character growth, and then, inexplicably, drawing us into a 40-minute dungeon with the Gi tribe, only to come out the other side for Nanaki to finish his goodbye. In Square Enix's eyes, they've delivered just by showing a statue and familiar dialogue. They're not quite sure what you liked about the original scene. They're not quite confident they can get it right just by using the original game as a guide to solid direction. So, better to add in noise and new twists. That way, if you didn't like the direction or writing, if you thought they botched the recreation, well, you already knew this wasn't a one-to-one remake. So it would be deeply unfair of you to try criticize that which was the author's intent: subversion. You can tell Square Enix were scrabbling around, not quite sure how to neatly insert this new Gi Tribe dungeon. It's got its own major plot beat. Turns out the Gi Tribe created the black materia, and the ancients stole it from them. They want it back so they can summon Meteor and nope the hell out of this world. I'm kinda tempted to fetch it for them, then we can all go play the original game together. Because I'm blown away by how much of the suspense and mystery Square Enix are draining out of Final Fantasy VII. The amount of times this game just tells me things up front. Reeve is Kate Sith. Tifa tells Aerith that Cloud was never in Nibelheim, throwing into disrepute both Cloud's flashback and the photo taken earlier. Hojo tells Cloud he belongs with the robed men. Kate Sith warns us that the Temple of the Ancients will trap us inside. Sephiroth keeps asking Cloud to give him the black materia, hinting that he actually will. Marlene reminds us how Aerith will die and to please keep that in the back of our minds for subversion time later. The game even warns you in advance that the big gold saucer date is coming up, so get your character relationships in order if you have a preference. Square Enix desperately trying to avoid a scenario where a crazed character shipper ends up on the wrong date and sends their controller through their TV. Back in my day, everything didn't have to go your way on the first try. Square Enix cast aside any mystery born out of the original game, but keep the mystery alive for their own contributions to this story. Probably one of the only times I wish they had told us something up front was that Sephiroth was Glenn all along, tricking Rufus into war, because letting this apparent new antagonist linger throughout the story, with the possibility that the character may have an edge on Sephiroth somehow, damages the mystique of the primary villain as you play. Now those memorable moments like Sephiroth invading the Temple of the Ancients don't seem to hit as hard as they used to. Every time I see Sephiroth now it's kinda like, oh, it's you. I'm not sure that's what Square Enix were going for, but it's where we've ended up. I guess when faced with such a calamity, it's hard not to feel like a purist. Call me old-fashioned, but I miss when Cloud lost his mind, wailing away at Aerith, and he woke up in a sea of guilt in Gongaga, and he wasn't able to reach her in time, and he wasn't able to say sorry. At all times, the game seems afraid to break your heart. But I want that. I want to feel something real. But I guess in a remake where even the black materia is fake, it's hard to get to the truth of it all. Earlier, in the Temple of the Ancients, the heroes faced their fears. Barret's fear is ironically the same as mine. More flashback content, revealing faces we didn't need to see. I didn't need to see Barret's wife die. The grief and pain he already carries painted a picture more powerful than anything Square Enix could render. I didn't need to see how Shinra captured Nanaki and what his first day in Hojo's lab was like. You see, I use this thing called my imagination. It helps with filling in white spaces in stories. And how exactly do you even fail this temple trial? You just stand in this room for 10 minutes without freaking out, and then you've earned a step closer to the black materia? There's nothing new to be gleaned from young Aerith wandering up and down the station looking for help, or from Tifa grieving over her father. I know all these events. I already know how the characters feel about them. But perhaps as the temple delves into the game's characters, it's an opportune brief moment for me to say, as far as characters go, Rebirth may not be perfect, and I can understand why people will have mixed reactions when comparing its characters to the original game, but there's enough of their personality there to feel like there's at least an approximate representation going on into the higher figures on the percentage scale, for me at least. Yes, even if Cloud continuously tries to murder Tifa and no one gives a shit, and even if Sid Highwind is not Sid Highwind at all, but a sort of low wind that sails through an office of censorship. By the way, I'm not bothered about losing Rocket Town or the future mission to space, but Sid's barbed tongue surely would have added some welcome spice to the team. Vincent Valentine is now a boss fight, the kind of reimagining I can get on board with. Although him granting Cloud access to explore the lab, but then freaking out because Cloud opened the wrong door, felt like a deeply contrived way to start a fight. So yeah, I don't have a major bone to pick with the characters, or at least it's not my first priority, because there's enough there to get the ball over the net for me. But it's the situations these characters find themselves in, and the lack of weight that is given to their most recognisable moments, that often pays them a grand disservice. But no moment is more poorly handled than Aerith's death. In the Forgotten Capital, whispers white and black converge. Infinite timelines are opening across the multiverse, and in the middle of it all, Aerith prays. For decades, her death was the centre of so many Final Fantasy VII conversations. Now, this iconic gaming moment takes on a meta level of its own, becoming the pivotal event across timelines, drawing out a sea of varying emotions, a centerpiece to Sephiroth's grand plan. There's a timeline where Cloud stops Sephiroth's blade. There's a timeline where he doesn't. I'm in the timeline where I don't care. When they want you to feel everything, you feel nothing instead. Rebirth offers an ending that is yours to interpret as you wish, for now. If you wanted Aerith to die, you got it. If you wanted Aerith to live, you can find that here too. Perhaps there's 1,000 reflections of this event across a crystalline surface. You choose the one that matters to you. But what is clear and singular and undeniable is that Rebirth completely fumbles one of the most memorable moments in video gaming, somehow again blindsiding us with obfuscation and misdirection. Non-committal to driving the sword through its social media star, to luring her into the water, to saying goodbye. Aerith talks to you, reassures you, fights alongside you. Aerith is here. And I'll remind you that after finishing Remake, I was no longer wedded to seeing Aerith's death. I wanted Square Enix to go full on and try something wild, fulfilling their own destiny, which they laid the groundwork for back with Remake. But this isn't ballsy. This is something that is not much of anything, committing to nothing clearly. A finale so ambiguous that, again, we are left in the position where an ending needs guides and breakdowns, and for you to face re-education and reprogramming should you choose to denounce it. Aerith clearly surviving would have been a better ending than this. Aerith clearly dying would have been a better ending than this. Another cast member taking the blade instead would have been a better ending. At least Rebirth would have loudly and proudly said something. Instead, it seems to be trying to say something, but has lost the guile to do it. Maybe it was always going to be this way, but to me it feels like 4 years ago, Square Enix knocked over the Final Fantasy VII Jenga tower, and after looking upon the strewn pieces and waiting for our reaction, they panicked and started putting the tower back together. So we get a cautious, whimpering ending that backs into a corner and begs you to love it. An ending whose only triumph is drawing a line through the original game's pivotal scene and saying, what if it happened and what if it didn't happen? But Final Fantasy VII is a game whose poignant OG moments are fed through a meat grinder, in a universe where there's a timeline for every breed of dog.
One time, we successfully mated a bulldog with a shih tzu.
Really?
Yeah, we called it a bullshit.
In a reality where Cloud and Zack are reunited at a conflict centered around Aerith's iconic scene at the Forgotten Capital. And somewhere in all of this, I am supposed to feel something. Remember that the story's opening teaches us that death is meaningless. Not even learning that Sephiroth plans to grab and collide all timelines gives me a sense of fear, because what if he doesn't get all the timelines? And what if just by him doing this action creates another timeline in itself? After all, they are forged with every decision made. So can you really get your hands around something that is growing at an exponential rate? Square Enix certainly can't get their hands around this monster they created. It's grown out of control, branching into a tale about emotions across worlds, with many versions of Zack, Cloud and the rest. Maybe Part 3's final boss will be an army of Sephiroth. Instead of Knights of the Round, it'll be Sephiroths of the Round. There's me looking ahead to the future again. I'm often told I need to stop doing that. I had a lot of criticism for Remake. So, has Rebirth made me feel any differently about anything? Namely my distaste at characters swerving their own death scenes? Well, a version of Big still gets lit up in this game. Wedge still meets the concrete somewhere in some side content. Maybe all this will lead to a place where fate cannot be changed. And when it's all said and done, looking back over the entire project, maybe I'll feel 10% better about the story. I guess that's a possibility. But how is it making me feel today? How is showing dead characters on screen making me feel about a story we're almost 70% of the way through? How does it feel to know that there's a mechanism that can bring dead characters back? Even if it's shut down, something could switch it back on. How does it feel having multiple realities in a remake of a story that was already fully loaded? As the game draws to a close, it seems to suggest Cloud is burdened with sight of more than one world. But he's finally experiencing what we've had to deal with since Remake. The tiny Bronco lifts into the sky, leaving a fluttering flower bed behind. And I guess I'm supposed to feel a lump in my throat for a character who is very much there, on screen, and interacting with Cloud. Instead, as the plane departs, I can't help thinking an empty field would have spoken 1,000 words. The triumphant end credits resound with beautiful versions of the live stream music and Aerith's theme. 4 years ago, this would have only hammered home everything I could have had. I would have been sad, but today I am grateful. In botching so many of the original game's iconic moments, Square Enix have reminded me of the cautious mindset I had many years before Remake, that a true remake was out of their grasp and beyond their ability. Remake had the excuse that a subversion of fate and destiny had tainted pivotal scenes from the original game. But so much of Rebirth's story runs unshackled from the Whisper's meddling. Now, by still daring to fly close to the sun of the original game, Rebirth faces the full weight of comparison in not just failing to recreate those standout original game moments, but in failing to deliver something nearly as compelling. So, regardless of alternate timelines and whispers, it is deeply cathartic to know that they were never within touching distance of remaking one of the finest video games of all time. There are plenty moments of joy to be found throughout this game. And yes, there's the baggage Rebirth has had to take on from Remake, but in remaking a game that was famous for its world and story, Rebirth will ultimately be judged for how it managed to mishandle both. I can't recommend such a remake purely off a battle system, fun soundtrack, and the isolated moments of sparkle found along the way. Just as they did with Remake, Square Enix have created a renewed and deeper appreciation for the original game. Many people don't know what they have until it's gone, or until it's almost replaced. So whether the final part tightly follows the yellow brick road of the original game, or seizes this second opportunity to forge a complete story of brand new events, it matters not. I don't need it to be one or the other, because either way, this project is so far removed from what I knew. And while for many this trilogy is a headache they feel they may never shake, the truth is that rather than Square Enix damaging the original game, they have immortalised it. I'll wager now that this remake project is far too convoluted to stand the test of time. It's a modern event with no lasting significance, not a classic in the making. To me, it's a travelling circus doomed to limp over the hill, never to return to my town. Eventually, all the hype and the adulation and the social media will follow with it. And what we'll be left with is just a game. The game. The world I can return to whenever I want. The story that lives on. The experience that triumphs over pale imitations. The memory we somehow thought needed a remake. Something that was always beyond Square Enix's capabilities and sensibilities. So, with the deepest of sincerity, thank you, Remake Project, for all that you continue to teach us. And perhaps, for me, therein lies your value.
When I was young, I'd listen to the radio, waiting for my favorite songs. When they played, I'd sing along. It made me smile. Those were such happy times, and not so long ago. How I wondered where they'd gone, but they're back again, just like a long-lost friend. All the songs I love so well, every sha-la-la-la, every whoa-whoa still shines. Every shing-a-ling-a-ling that they're starting to sing so fine. When they get to the part where he's breaking her heart, it can really make me cry, just like before. It's yesterday once more. Looking back on how it was in years gone by, and the good times that I had, makes today seem rather sad. So much has changed. It's yesterday once more.